Name and title first, please.
Scott Irwin, Professor of Agricultural Economics, University of Illinois.
Right to me. So the Ukraine-Russia issue is a big deal as it relates to the supply of grains on the planet. Why?
Well, because the Ukraine alone is one of the major grain producing areas in the world. And the Black Sea area in general, as it's called, which includes Russia's grain producing areas, is just enormous. For example, Russia is the number one producer and exporter of wheat in the world. And all of a sudden, all of that is up in question.
And it has been putting upside pressure into the marketplace for uncertainty about the exports from that area. What happens if it's taken out of production? Just the export market for corn, I suppose, some of the wheat from Ukraine in the 2022-23 growing season.
Well, I think that there are two issues, Todd. One is to start with the old crop. Trade estimates that I've seen suggest that there are 600 million bushels of corn, basically, that's already been contracted for export because Ukraine exports virtually their entire corn crop, a little under 2 billion. They kind of go between 1.5 and 2 billion bushels a year. It's trapped. And I don't see any way that that's going to get out of there very easily for weeks, maybe months. So you've got an old crop problem of moving stocks of grain that are there. And then you have, in some sense, the even bigger problem, which is what will end up getting planted this spring, because the war has started up pretty much at the beginning of the planting season. And so that potentially puts a huge hole in global grain balance sheets if you just take Ukraine's grain production, corn, wheat, and probably sunflowers in that order are the most important to the world markets. And so it's a huge issue.
It's a year's plus worth of grain from Ukraine that may be taken out of the marketplace. How should the United States think about what to do as an issue as it relates to the price of food and making up for some of this if it can?
Well, I think we need to be now, under these extraordinary wartime circumstances, be thinking outside the box. And one outside of the box suggestion I made yesterday on Twitter was maybe consider opening up the Conservation Reserve Program acreage for 1 year cropping. It may not be practical, may not be legal, but my point is to really try to get people thinking and realizing it, because this has happened so fast, Todd, and it's so big that we're just going to have to think outside the box. And that's why I put out what I did, is mainly to get the conversation started about thinking outside the box, because this is not going to go away quickly, in my opinion now. And it's just a huge supply shock to global grain markets, which, as you said, have follow-on effects on the price of food. We can handle that here in the US. It'll be painful, but these could be particularly difficult questions in lower income countries that rely on, say, wheat exports from the Ukraine, like Egypt, where the population spends a much higher proportion of their incomes on food. This could be a big problem for their domestic stability.
One final comment I'd like from you. Last fall, you and Joe Jansen said, hey, the price of corn tells us there may be 96 million acres planted this spring by farmers. You came back and doubled down on that in January and said, we're still staying with it. Have you changed your mind yet?
I think, no, I haven't fundamentally changed my mind. The market has changed since last fall in January. Starting in December with the supply problems down in South America, the market started putting more incentives in place in terms of the soybean corn price ratio for soybeans. It flipped starting in December back towards favoring soybeans. So I would adjust my expectations now. The USDA was at 92 million corn, 88 million soybeans last week. I'm still at maybe 94 million corn and 89 million soybeans. The big difference that I have with everybody before Ukraine even started, Todd, was that I think that we're going to see an increase in the overall size of acreage in the U.S., and that's going to leave more room for planting basically of everything than most people are assuming. We'll see.